Hello, and welcome to River Network's self-paced organizational growth learning series, focused on key topics for organizations growing their internal capacity. This series is best suited for groups who have already invested in their basic organizational structures, such as their mission statement, roles, leadership, and work plans. You can learn more about those topics by accessing our Organizational Health self-paced learning series. This episode of the Organizational Growth series is covering community assessments, which we can think about as an introductory step or simpler version of strategic planning. For those who aren't familiar with River Network, we work to grow and strengthen a national network of water, justice, and river advocates. We convene and build our network with training, resources, peer groups, technical support, funding, and in-person gatherings like our national conference River Rally. River Network envisions a powerful and inclusive movement that ensures abundant clean water for all people and nature to thrive. Our work includes three focus areas: climate resilient communities, healthy and resilient rivers, and clean, safe, affordable drinking water. We work to build strong organizations and leaders across all of these focus areas, which is what brings us here today to talk about the key characteristics of a growing organization. At River Network, we know that we do our best work in partnership with others. This video training series is a collaboration with the Hudson River Watershed Alliance, an organization in New York State that is uniting and empowering communities to protect their shared waters. Funding for this series comes in part from the New York State Environmental Protection Fund through the Hudson River Estuary Program of the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. Following along the organizational growth checklist, we're now on the fifth and last topic, community assessments. This topic builds on the evaluation systems conversation we started in episode 4 by focusing on external feedback and metrics to understand how a group or organization fits into the landscape of players, issues, and people in their service area. As an overview of today's episode, we're going to cover the following aspects of completing a community assessment. First, we'll talk about how to define community and why it's important to do so before getting started. Secondly, we'll discuss ways to learn about your community and understand your place in it. Thirdly, we'll offer some ideas about how to intentionally engage community for meaningful feedback, with special attention to reciprocity for community members' contributions. All of these topics should guide us toward answering the questions posed on the organizational growth checklist. Consider pausing the video and attempting to answer those questions now, before watching the module, and then answering them again after watching and implementing some of the activities suggested. First things first, we need to define community. Similar to the important discussion about defining audiences from episode 1 on communications, defining community is critical before you start this work. Oftentimes, groups or organizations equate community to the literal residents who live in their service area. That might be true, but challenge yourself to think a little more specifically based on your mission statement. The show Community is actually a great example of this, demonstrating that while the entirety of a college campus could be the community we're paying attention to, the specifically defined community is the Spanish study group that forms from Senor Chang's class. Perhaps the community you actually fit into is the business community because you're trying to influence plastics pollution at its source. Your community might be local government agencies if your main goals involve local stormwater ordinances and zoning regulations. Consider that your community might dominantly include schools and educators if your main goals are around watershed education and building the next generation of stewards. While residents are surely a part of the picture, there are more specific communities that are likely just as important to define before we start a community assessment process. Take a moment now to write a short description of how you define community based on your mission statement. Once we define community, we can start understanding more about it and our place in it. There are some tools you can use to start building an understanding of the community without doing your own surveys, interviews, or outreach. The first tactic here is a basic organizational landscape analysis, aided by your favorite internet search engine. You'll want to find answers to the following questions. What other groups or organizations are doing similar work in your area? Are there any similar groups that overlap within your defined service area? What kinds of groups and organizations are successful or visible regardless of whether their mission or goals are similar to yours? Are there common sponsors, funders, or donors whose names you see or hear often? Which public agencies at the municipal, county, or state level are similar to you or supportive of your mission? There may be other questions that arise for you as you look at this list. Feel free to add them. This is just a starting place. If you were to take a basic landscape analysis a few steps further, you might be completing a power or resource mapping exercise. The key difference here is that power mapping is used to identify key players, their influence, their resources, and their relationships regarding a specific goal. Power mapping can open up more capacity for organizations by clearly identifying potential collaborators and partners, but covers all of the following. Partners, specifically who is doing similar or related work that you can actively collaborate with. Allies, who are folks that would support your work or intersect with your mission and be an advocate for you. Those with influence, who has resources that you need or the power to amplify your work. And also thinking about opposition, particularly for advocacy and policy focused groups who might be working in opposition to what you are trying to achieve. For specific guidance on power mapping, we recommend checking out resource mapping tools from the Good Work Institute and power mapping guidance from the Commons Social Change Library. In addition to some basic landscape research or power mapping, using existing data to understand your community can be a great starting place, especially in lieu of doing all your own outreach. Perhaps there are existing survey efforts that have helpful data. These might be political surveys, socioeconomic indicator surveys, census data, snapshot polls from local news media, or regional data from a larger organization that you can safely interpolate to the scale that you work on. Foundations and other funding organizations are often collecting data and publishing reports as well. Leaning on data and survey efforts from others can save you significant time and effort, as well as help avoid survey fatigue amongst your community members. Once you've exhausted your research tools, there may still be some questions lingering specific to your mission-driven work that you'd like to get feedback from the community about. This is when you'll consider well-designed and intentional community engagement tactics. Recall that your community has likely been surveyed, interviewed, and otherwise asked for feedback on hundreds of things. We are well into the age of constant marketing, polling, and feedback. Before beginning any efforts, consider how reciprocity plays a role in this process. What is your group or organization providing in return for community members' time, energy, and perspectives? It might be something instant, like a gift in exchange for their time, or perhaps it's something less tangible, like effective, ongoing communication, the benefit your work brings to them longer term, or perhaps simply expressions of gratitude and recognition. No matter what you choose to ask or how you ask it, prioritize reciprocity rather than extraction when soliciting your community for input. When it comes to what and how, there is a spectrum of ways to consider. Many organizations and groups default to designing and circulating surveys as a way to gather community feedback. And while this is a fine way to do so, surveys don't always capture the most authentic or accurate perspectives, and they can be effort intensive for both the organization designing them and those completing them. We recommend taking a less formal approach to feedback and leaning into some of the following tactics. Making the most of tabling opportunities by asking one or two tactful questions and recording those responses, either verbally or through a quick interactive station. Capitalizing on volunteer and stewardship events by including an intentional debrief, addressing how the event serves those attending or how it relates to other experiences attendees are having. Listening more deeply in peer spaces, coalition meetings, public meetings, or other gathering spaces to pick up on valuable perspectives that relate to your work. Scheduling one-on-one meetings with trusted representatives of your community and letting open-ended conversations reveal priorities and desires. Utilizing internal evaluation procedures like those from episode 4 to gather alternate information, such as including questions in board leadership or volunteer evaluations about what they're hearing from others regarding your group or its mission. Also consider incorporating a broader community assessment as part of watershed planning that your group already might be engaged in. Of course, it's still okay to use a survey if you need it. If you do decide to design a survey or interview tool to gather specific feedback, here are a few suggestions to get the most out of that effort. First, consider the value of subjective numerical scales for questions that involve ranking versus assigning descriptive text to answer the same question. Depending on what you want to know and what you want to do with that data, one or the other may be more helpful. Limit open-ended questions to respect survey takers' time and energy. A little bit of research can turn an open-ended question into a simple list of checkboxes or multiple choice options. Zero in on questions you won't get answers to anywhere else, getting as specific as possible about your group's mission, programs, projects, or reputation. Try to be upfront about why you're asking for this data, who will review it, and how it's going to be used. Follow up afterward to show that you actually did use the data as intended, and give survey takers an option to contact you with questions or comments. And finally, test your survey. Ask someone who had no part in creating it to take the survey before it's circulated, primarily to get feedback on how questions and answer options are worded. Many times, the way we're asking a question doesn't actually solicit the type of response we want, and the best way to nip this in the bud is to actually test our questions out on someone. The last piece of this puzzle includes what to do with all of the information we've collected. Between research and outreach, you'll have tons of context to use going forward. At the beginning of this episode, you may recall that we referred to a community assessment as the introductory step or lighter version of a strategic plan. Strategic plans help guide a group or organization's long-term direction by setting key priorities and strategies. Utilizing the information you've gathered and received during your community assessment, your group will ideally have discussions and identify actions related to the following. Is our mission still relevant and responsive to those we are trying to serve? Are the programs and projects we're completing aligned with both our mission statement and the community's needs? Are we collaborating with the right partners to maximize our efforts? Are we inclusive of key voices, perspectives, or relationships in our work? What strategies would enable us to advance our mission with more buy-in and ease? There may be other questions your community assessment drives you to, and we encourage you to explore any and all of them that come up as a result of this process. Incorporate your actions into your work plan to stay accountable longer term. If your group or organization is ready to take next steps and explore strategic planning more fully, check out River Network's Strategic Planning in 15 Minutes or Less video training series, which covers the what and why of planning, considerations for hiring strategic planning support, strategic planning specific to networks and collaboratives or coalitions, and how to keep a strategic plan relevant once you've invested the time in creating it. To recap this episode, we talked about defining community at the front end of a community assessment process, using research and power mapping to build context ahead of community engagement, responsible and intentional ways to go about soliciting community feedback for your assessment, and finally, questions that a community assessment can help us answer and the next steps you might take with those. Take a moment and revisit the questions from the checklist. Attempt to answer them after completing some initial information gathering. See how a community assessment might broaden how you interpret and answer those questions. This is the last episode in the Organizational Growth Learning series. Congratulations on making your way through the checklist. We encourage you to reflect on how the topics in this series are related to each other and to revisit any of the modules as needed. Thank you for watching the fifth and final episode in the Organizational Growth Self-Paced Learning series. To learn more and access additional free resources, visit rivernetwork.org.